In relocating its setting to the Hawaiian island of Oahu, developer Ubisoft Ivory Tower finds the perfect virtual playground for its latest open-world racer, the Crew Motorfest. Between the Paradise coastline, its mountain ranges, the bustle of downtown Honolulu, and even its temples, there's no shortage of variety here. Every region has a distinct flavour, a terrain type, a theme that plays host to all manner of racing events. We get cross-country rallies, street races, vintage car showcases, even boats, planes and bikes get in on the action. As the third entry in the series, the Crew Motorfest's new backdrop is truly the highlight, and also a welcome gear change from the USA setting of the Crew 1 and 2. Now, reviewing Motorfest's performance on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S today, and despite having a month's worth of patch updates since its release in September, it's also clear the game still has issues in technical polish worth touching on. In comparison then, just how do the three consoles compare? Do PS5 and Series X hold to a rock-solid 60 frames per second in their performance modes? And if you're a Series S owner, what's the state of its one and only 30 FPS mode? Let's find out. On paper, the idea behind the Crew Motorfest is a proven winner. It takes the free-roaming gameplay loop of Forza Horizon, the open-ended design, to a brand new location. It's you, the open road, and a sprawling map filled with different events. Just as with the Crew 2, the map view in itself is impressively handled. Hit the options button and you get a complete 3D rendering of the entire island with a camera that cranes up on high from the clouds. Except this top-down view also scales right down to your car on the ground in a seamless transition. Added to that, we get a rolling time of day cycle, weather states, and all of it is built around online integration. And so, in driving from A to B, you'll see other cars, bikes, boats, and planes whiz by as ghosts, locked in their own instanced race. As a result, there's never a dull moment in driving between events. Plus, it mixes in a generous use of object physics for brick walls, street lights, and anything in between. The only thing missing really is the NPCs, who seem to have been banished from the city to let the cars wreak havoc. And while we're on the negatives, it must be said lighting in Motorfest isn't always its strongest point. Especially at night, or while driving through tunnels, cars take on this almost otherworldly glow. There's a lack of indirect shading in these cases, a lack of material interaction with the metals, the gloss of the paintwork across the car's top, causing vehicles to look detached from the environment. It's a shame given the obvious care that went into their design, and not to mention the world overall. Next up then, let's explore which is the best way to play the game. Both PS5 and Series X include two graphics settings, a 60 FPS performance mode and a 30 FPS resolution mode. So, taking Series X in example, the main difference between the two modes is that the performance mode runs at a dynamic 1440p, dropping to 1152p at lowest, and the resolution mode meanwhile gives you a true native 4K image with extremely rare minor drops under that 3840 by 2160 figure. In both modes, the image is reconstructed to their target resolutions with AMD's FSR2, and otherwise, the differences between the two are subtle. Textures, shadows, and SSR quality are a match for a start, but you will notice LODs, the draw distance, is reined in for the performance mode. In zooming in here, note the large tree up ahead and its shadow are rendered in more fully from the starting grid on the 30 FPS resolution mode. Likewise, and zooming in again to an extreme here, minor objects like checkpoint flags also draw in farther afield on the right side. These are exceptional points in fairness, and it does obviously take a great deal of zooming to catch. The good news here being that to hit 60 FPS on Series X and PS5, you don't lose much else. Grass draw distances are a match between the modes, as is the rendering range for terrain. The only other difference of note is that specific spots of foliage, bushes, are stripped out in the city area on performance mode. But outside of the drop to 1440p, the lower LOD settings for trees and shadows, and these rare instances of removed foliage, the 60 FPS performance mode is clearly the way to go. All of this applies to PS5 exactly, including the resolution bounds of each mode. So, to compare PS5 and Series X directly then, let's take the 60 FPS performance mode as an example. We get a practical mirror image here. Every blade of grass, every rock is precisely matched on both sides. And of course, the resolution values on PS5 are matching to Series X with a dynamic 1440p setup while running at 60 FPS. Switching over to Series S next, the hard, cold reality is that there's no mode toggle whatsoever. You get one way to play at 30 FPS. The logical comparison point then is against Series X's resolution mode, which also caps to 30. In terms of resolution, the 4 teraflop machine on left of course doesn't match the 4K image of Series X, and instead we get a dynamic 1440p here with drops to 1152p. No surprises here, it's an expected drop in resolution for Series S, proportionate to its lower GPU spec. And in fairness, the overall image quality still holds up pretty well. As for other visual downgrades, well, Series S uses similar settings to the 60 FPS performance mode on the premium consoles. In other words, you get a similar drop in object draw distances, causing more pop-in on trees. Plus, there's a more obvious shadow cascade ahead of the player, meaning these trees fill in with shade later on Series S. But on the whole, the visual setup on Series S isn't the issue. It holds up. Rather, it's the performance side of things that poses the bigger problem. Kicking off with framerate testing, let's look at PS5 in its performance mode first. Here we get 60 FPS a vast majority of the time, and with VSync engaged. It's certainly not a perfect reading though. There are segments of races which drop briefly to the mid-50s, usually triggered by too many cars appearing in one spot. The starting grid of an event race is at times a stress point, though splitting from the pack later in the race tends to even out the frame rate again. Still, these drops are never too glaring. It's certainly enjoyable as a 60 FPS experience 99% of the time. Perhaps more of a distraction is the free driving across the island itself. In migrating across the map, there are more regular drops to the mid-50s, more hitches, sometimes completely out of the blue. It's possibly due to world streaming or even the online netcode, the ghost cars, and moving to the map view only exaggerates the issue. Overall, it's still a robust experience on PS5 at 60 FPS despite its blemishes, and without question the mode to use. Next along is Series X, where the turnout at 60 FPS is slightly better. The main difference is that drops are less frequent, in racing events especially. Typically you'll get these odd, single or double frame drops on occasion mid-race, rather than PS5's brief lurches into the mid-50s. So it's a minor win in this sense for Series X's stability and frame rate. The drawback is that Series X also uses adaptive VSync, meaning screen tear will at times kick in at the top of the display. Usually you'll see it during a frame rate drop, as rare as those are. To an extent, tearing lessens the impact of a frame rate hit, the logic being that if a frame doesn't render in time, within 16.7 milliseconds, we get a partial frame instead. So yes, do expect to see brief flashes of tearing from time to time. Otherwise, the map view, the general cruising around the island, still drops the odd frame, if again slightly less so than PS5. After all said and done, the 60 FPS mode is the setting to choose, but supposing you really do want a native 4K out of the game, well, you have the 30 FPS option. On PS5, the resolution mode caps to a locked 30 FPS in gameplay, and based on every race I've tested so far, I've not seen so much as a single frame drop, so the outlook is good. VSync is engaged too, of course. The only troubled stretch of performance on PS5 is on the world map, oddly enough, where uneven frame pacing is introduced. But other than that, PS5 hands in a smooth, evenly frame-paced line for actual gameplay. It's in switching to Series X though, in its resolution mode, that we see a problem. In this case, the 30 FPS cap is unevenly frame-paced even in gameplay. Add in the adaptive VSync on Xbox Series X, which triggers tearing right at the top of the frame as well, and at times, it's a very choppy playing experience. Check out the oscillating frame time graph on the left here. It's really no way to enjoy any racing game. Thankfully, Series X users have an easy opt-out from this mode with the 60 FPS performance option. Okay, I've left the worst news for last here, because yes, Series S only has that single 30 FPS option, and yes, it has the exact same performance issues as Series X's resolution mode. We get tearing, we get uneven frame pacing, and for Series S users, there's no alternative, no backup plan at 60. Astonishingly, this is the only way to play Motorfest on the 4 teraflop console, and as it stands, I'd say it's unacceptable for any racing game to run this way. Especially in drifting tight corners, the inconsistent frame distribution at 30 FPS sticks out like a sore thumb for any quick lateral movement. Now, it's understood that the beta version of the game ran at 60 FPS on Series S, so it's unclear why the final build opted to cap at 30. Needless to say, it's one of the biggest disappointments on Series S I've encountered so far this generation. Where PS5 and Series X are easy to recommend on their 60 FPS modes, this version of the Crew Motorfest doesn't offer the same experience, making it one to avoid. After a 5-year wait since the last game, the Crew Motorfest takes advantage of PS5 and Series X hardware handsomely with a true 60 FPS mode. There's no question this performance option is the best fit for its brand of nitro-fueled racing, and despite certain rough spots, notably drops during the free roaming segments, both consoles do broadly lock at 60 as well. Sadly, this luxury doesn't extend to Series S right now. Through all the high points of Ivory Tower's world building, playing at 30 FPS with uneven frame pacing plus tearing just doesn't fit the bill for a next-gen console experience, not by a long stretch. All of which is a shame because there's genuine quality behind the Crew Motorfest's core gameplay loop. For anyone finished with Forza Horizon 5 or anyone seeking a game in a similar mould, it comes well recommended. But in the console space, ideally the PS5 or Series X versions are the ones to pick up. That about wraps up my look at Motorfest on current-gen consoles. If you did like this video, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell for instant notifications as any new video lands. To get a high-quality version of this video, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch directly, you know where to find me. But from me for now, thanks for watching.